Forum until they realised that was too self-derogatory, and then they renamed it the Major Economies Forum. So that still exists, and I'm not quite sure it's meeting again soon, but it met after the G8. When the G8 met in July, it merged into the Major Economies Forum. And in fact, that was one of the things I was going to say. There kind of seems to be this plethora of summits, especially at the moment. I mean, some of you I know were in New York, but it's kind of like, in terms of trying to think about this summit today, tomorrow, and what's going to happen, what I pick up a little bit just sitting in the media centre and talking to people is a bit of summit fatigue. There are low expectations for this summit. There's just been the high-level event, nice speeches, but it didn't deliver a lot. Then you had a sort of non-initiative or initiative, and then there's a meeting of the UN Security Council, and then they'll turn up and they will do some things, and then there's going to be next week there's a Bangkok UN talks on climate, and the start of October there's IMF World Bank annual meetings, and so there's this plethora of summits. I think that, in a sense, that's not helping the political dynamic. I think when we were looking at this as Oxfam a month or two back, we were thinking maybe it would. Maybe we could get some finance ministers to UN to this, and it would really crescendo to a climate moment. But the politics turns out, as far as we can see, not to be, unless we're very shocked in the next 24 hours, not to be right and not to be right for that. But I still think the kind of the fact that we're a year into this new former summit is really important. It isn't, of course, from Oxfam's point of view, it isn't a summit that's including the poorest countries. There's still an issue of voice, but the G20 beginning to dominate over the G8, the idea that you can't now stop having this forum and this bigger representation of the world is still not, you couldn't call it democratic, but nonetheless it's getting in most of the world's economic power in the world. So as a lobby moment and a decision moment, it is, I think it's really important.
Prime Minister Rudd from Australia earlier this week really was suggesting that the G20 was probably the best place to make some of these decisions, particularly around climate change. He was talking at the time, but because the G8 represents such a small group, G20 has a larger 85% of the economy kind of worldview included, where at the UN level you've got too many people, too many voices in the room to really come to some. Like at the 20, you've got credibility for representing a large group, but also it's more effective, more efficient way of decision making or pushing things out, like the communique.
And I mean, on the one hand, some people say to me, well, G20 is already a lot more difficult than G8, because G8 used to be very informal. I mean, it's become more formalised in the bigger summit jamboree. It used to be almost like a fireside chat, and then it became G8 plus 4, or G8 plus 7, or G8 plus 5. And actually, I was talking to two different people today who were saying, is it G20 plus 7 or is it G20 plus 9? We couldn't quite agree who. And last time in April, Spain and the Netherlands had come, even though they weren't quite big enough, and apparently this time the Dutch will come. I mean, at one level, I suppose it's always going to be easier to agree when there's fewer numbers. But one of the issues around climate has been that in the UN talks, you've got the G77 and China in a group, attempting not to become too divided, to be a united group in the face of the richer countries and the ones who are most historically responsible for polluting. And so the sort of the Brazil, Russia, India, the BRICS have been quite reluctant to have some of that climate discussion at the G20, but I think that's actually, in some ways, that's been letting the richer countries off the hook, and they're now using that as an excuse. And what we've really been saying to them, like in Britain or in European countries, is actually they won't use it as a negotiating forum if you're looking for them to make concessions there, but if you're going to put some money on the table, as you should, if you want a deal in Copenhagen, none of them are going to say, no, don't do it, because it's the G20, not the UN. So I think unpacking the politics of what is and isn't feasible, and who's responsible and whose turn it is to move is quite interesting. And of course in April it wasn't a climate moment. In February thought might it be a climate moment as well as an economic crisis poverty moment. And by the start of March, a month ahead of the summit, it was clear it wasn't. And then this time it seemed it really was going to be. Obama had put it on the agenda. It was being held in America. There was more background work on climate than we saw in the run-up to the April one. But again, the timing seems to have now gone askew, or the political will has gone askew, whatever your favourite analysis and excuses, and so at the moment that's now it's going down the agenda, and that's both interesting and disappointing, because last week we had the EU informal summit when the European leaders met for dinner, and they actually put some figures on the table, and you can analyse those and ask how credible they are, but we weren't expecting them to do that, actually. To be entirely honest, we were caught by surprise. We try and follow these things closely. We didn't know that was coming. Japan said it was going to cut emissions by 25%. China made stronger commitments than it has before, and even India changed the way it's been talking. So, so it's odd in a way that I'm sitting here being quite pessimistic when actually you look back the last 10 days, a lot of things have happened that we didn't know were about to happen, and that are mostly positive as we're trying to create exactly the sort of political dynamics we wanted to see, or we all want to see, if we were to get to a deal by Copenhagen. But suddenly that's gone off the boil. It looks like being a more typical summit. It's going to focus on the financial regulation. It might do something popular but not very tough, really, about bankers' bonuses. I don't know how much Greg talked about that. It might sort of come out with some grand statement that there's some new global growth and stability pact, sort out global trade imbalances.
So what shifted that dynamic in the sense that President Obama is distracted by the healthcare fight in the United States?
I think there's a sense that America and Europe are at different points.
Yeah.
America and Europe are at different points, and although the Europeans are always very keen to say we're the good guys, we're not blocking anything, I mean, they've provisionally put some money on the table, but they haven't been clear about it. They haven't said this is definitely extra to development aid. And in fact, we know that for Germany at the moment is completely resistant to it being extra to development aid. But if it's just development aid, you're just taking money from schools and houses to pay for flood defences or new types of agriculture that are more resistant to floods or droughts. So it's absolutely a crucial thing to see in the next weeks and months to Christmas, to December, if the EU actually delivers. So there's divisions within the EU. Sometimes the EU will want to blame America, sometimes they blame India and China, and it always wants to say we're the good guys. So I think partly these tensions about should it be the UN negotiations, should it be the G20. EU actually, although it moved last Thursday, it was very last minute. Obama certainly, obviously, political attention has been on the healthcare. So when are those bills going to get through the Senate? So it's where you put the emphasis in terms of which is the biggest problem is some question.
For the sake of argument, I mean, almost all the developed countries and China have all expended enormous sums in the past year on economic stimulus. So, where is it thought that the money for this aid is going to come from? Is just the assumption that there's always extra money in the industrial world to just get the willpower, or?
Well, that may be true, but that's not what we've been arguing on the climate finance. I mean, we've been saying that if you're to actually get the emissions reduction, you're going to have to start having some sort of carbon permits and emissions trading permit scheme, and that there are different ways you can trade those or auction them. But if you auction them, you actually create a huge new pool of money, and that money doesn't even all have to go to the poorest countries. In fact, if you did it in the right way, you could create a huge pool of funds. And then I don't know how much Greg talked to you on the economic crisis side about the tax havens issue or the international currency tax. So precisely what we've been looking at is what are the different ways you can raise money, especially now it's an economic crisis and soaring public debt, that are actually realistic, rather than just keeping saying to the rich countries, you've got to keep paying and keep paying. I mean, there may be a moral argument for that, but it's not always going to go down real policy.
What about the
And I think the other thing about the money is that as the world moves, whether it moves too slowly or fast enough towards controlling temperature rises, there's going to be you see it already, but there's going to be more and more green technology, and that's actually going to turn into a market and competitiveness. That's not our main interest, but it's going to drive a new new growth dynamic. And so there's a lot in it for the richer countries, the countries with stronger industry, stronger research and development and so on. So they like to set it up as if it's just we've got to pay and they don't take on board the responsibility arguments, and they're not yet really facing up to the economic opportunities that are going to actually be there.
There was some disappointment. I was disappointed in April when there wasn't anything resembling a green stimulus in the financial package that came out at the 20%, 15%, whatever. There was no number attached to that kind of thing, and clearly if that could help, policy could help in countries to help spur innovation and make those kind of things happen. I don't think it's going to just happen on its own.
I think it was really disappointing. We wrote a bit on that. We did a sort of 2-page note that we published just on green stimulus. But I think there's kind of green stimulus to get you out of the recession, and then there's the longer run trend of where's it going to go in the next 5 years, 15 years, 25 years. And this isn't
going to grow.
This isn't an Oxfam position, but there is a whole argument about